So yesterday we looked at one of the most beloved, most well-crafted and just straight up amazing anime movies of all time, the 5-star meal of Japanese animation. This time we're going to be looking at a movie that is more the junk food of anime movies. Fun, but certainly not that deep or sophisticated. But I still love it all the same, and it finally gives me a chance to talk about one of my favourite franchises, Pokémon. A lot of people don't remember this, but Pokémon was actually the first major introduction to anime for Europe. DBZ and Sailor Moon didn't really reach the UK or other Euro countries until much later. So most kids of my generation's first exposure to Eastern animation was this show and Digimon. In fact, there's a famous rumour that Pokémon was first offered to the BBC, but they turned it down because they thought it looked too weird. Ironic coming from the company that brought us Doctor Who and Monty Python. And so, it was next offered to ITV, and BBC regretted that decision ever since when they saw how popular the show became on the other channel. I don't know how true that story is, but given that the BBC then took on a bunch of B-tier animes like Monster Rancher and the Japanese adaptation of the Moomins, I could certainly believe it.
Don't you dare badmouth the Moomins!
Sorry, Huck! So yeah, Pokémon was the show that was responsible for making a whole generation of weebs in the UK. And of course, I was obsessed with it as a kid. The first series premiered when I was about 5, so it was the prime age to get suckered into this franchise. Though admittedly, I didn't start playing the games until Gen 3. Though, do you want to hazard a guess as to what the first ever Pokémon themed game I ever played was? You'd never guess. Yep, Pokémon Pinball. It was one of the first games I ever got on my Game Boy Color for my 6th birthday alongside Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, and I still maintain to this day that that is the essential gaming starter kit, Super Mario and a pinball game. So while my introduction to the mainstream games was a bit late, my love of the TV show was unparalleled at the time. And looking back, yeah, it's rather silly, but it's still a ton of fun, and truth be told, I think a lot of where I got Huck's personality from came from Pikachu in this show. So when I found out that there was a movie of the show coming out, I think I just about wet my little pants at the news. Pokémon the first movie was one of my earliest cinema-going memories alongside Toy Story 2. Me and my dad at the local theatre, and me standing up in my seat before the movie began to ask the audience to shut up so I could watch the movie. No, seriously, I actually did that. And when I came out, I think I achieved childhood nirvana. I loved it. In fact, to put it into perspective, even as a kid I knew Pokémon was silly, and I loved it for that. But as a kid, when you see something in the theatre, you want to see them take it to the next level, but not just be the show with a slightly bigger budget, which is what these movies eventually did become. So just imagine how I reacted to when the movie started and you see this. And I think as a kid, oh yeah, this is going to be awesome. On reflection though, I do notice a lot of the flaws that I didn't notice the first time, but let's get into the story first. So I'm sure most of you know about the show's premise, but just to be kind, this is the world of Pokémon, strange creatures that can control vastly supernatural powers that inhabit the whole world. So what do you think the people of this world do about it? Respectfully stay away from the monsters that can turn them inside out with a thought? No, they shove them into tiny balls and make them fight each other. Granted, this element of the series has kinda cast a shadow over the franchise since its inception, since it's basically anime cock or dog fighting rings. But while some of the Pokemon aren't too particularly happy about being caught, they do warm up to their owners eventually, though you could argue that that's just Stockholm Syndrome, and they do actually enjoy fighting. In fact, they do it in the wild anyway, so I guess that makes it okay. Though I doubt in the real world the police would agree if they caught you making animals fight each other. Regardless, the show is very creative and a lot of fun, and follows the exploits of a young budding Pokemon trainer, Ash, who just recently in the show has not only been allowed to become the champion, but also grow up, and he's accompanied by his companions. While like Doctor Who, the companions tend to switch out after a while, in this series he's with his most iconic group of companions, the rock Pokemon trainer Brock, and the water Pokemon trainer Misty, no doubt named after Misty Hyman. And they venture through the world catching and fighting new Pokemon to try and become the best Pokemon trainers ever. So you'd imagine that the movie would be about them fighting in a big tournament or something, right? Oh no. One of the things that people can be very split upon about Pokémon, and my dad was no doubtably very confused by when he saw this movie, is that they tend to have side plots or ongoing themes that go into the very mystical, scientific, or just downright ludicrous elements about this world. Obviously to try and give the world more depth and seem more intriguing. And this movie fully delves into what is probably the second most famous Pokémon outside of the Chew, Mewtwo. Mewtwo is a clone of what was considered at the time the most powerful Pokémon in the world, Mew. But due to complications and the lead scientist of the project being a bit sidetracked with other things, Mewtwo ended up angry and violent, and over time, due to how the world treated him, ended up hating humanity and wanted to liberate all Pokémon from their masters and subjugate humanity. So basically, Mewtwo is the Pokémon embodiment of Peter, though his efforts are nowhere near as stupid or self-publicising as the real thing. To execute his plan, he invites a bunch of the most famous Pokémon trainers to his island for a tournament, but in reality it's to steal their Pokémon. Well, given his motivation, you'd think that he probably wants to take them and overthrow humans, right? No, he makes a bunch of clones of them and then gets them into a big fight with the trainers in order to kill the true Pokémon as he considers them tainted. So yeah, he really is Peter. So, yeah, a lot of the plot doesn't make sense, but to be fair, a lot of Pokémon stories don't make a lot of sense, and they're just meant to be fun for kids and show more of this interesting world. And in that regard, this movie is actually a lot of fun. The movie is clearly trying to invoke Akira with the idea of a scientific experiment gone wrong and a corporation trying to control it, even down to having psychic powers, and for a kids movie, it's not bad. Obviously it's not on the level of Akira in terms of character depth and world building, but this is Pokémon, it's kind of understandable in that regard, and yeah, obviously it was not going to be anywhere near as gory. Pokémon is one of those franchises that you need to be introduced to it in the right way. Those who are of my generation and slightly older were able to settle into the silliness of it perfectly, whereas those who were older were probably like, what the hell is this? Including my dad when he saw it, no doubt. And to be perfectly honest, on reflection, the Pokémon anime isn't that great in terms of overall anime. As an adaptation of a video game, it is a lot of fun, but it does feel very corny, the voice acting is a tad grating, and like a lot of animes, it really stretches itself out way longer than it needs to be. And I don't mean that in terms of it's still going, that only makes sense with how long the game series has been going on for. I mean how each series is insanely long and it can really make it feel like a slog to get through. And sadly, this movie doesn't really help with some of those flaws. The protagonists, besides Brock, who is always awesome, are a tad annoying. The attempts to be deep and meaningful do fall kind of flat, and we'll get into that in a bit. And the comedy can be really cringe-inducing.
You want to cross, maybe? We take you, yeah? We Vikings are used to big wave. We get you to new island faster than you can say perfect nougat.
Yeah, thanks. That added a lot. But there are a lot of great things in this movie that do make it entertaining. I do have to mention the alternate opening that did play with a few versions, including mine when I saw it in the theatre, where they go into the backstory of Dr. Fuji, Mewtwo's creator, and why he wants to perfect cloning in order to bring back his dead daughter. And it really does help give more emotional depth to a story and more layers to Mewtwo and an explanation to his motivation. Sadly, a lot of people didn't get to see this alternate intro, and instead they got the short film of Pikachu's Vacation, which is a cute little short, but it's nothing compared to the original intro, which does really elevate some of the flaws of this movie. The inclusion of Mew was a lot of fun. Mew was the original playground myth Pokémon, the only Pokémon in the original game that could not be caught by conventional means. It was super powerful, and it could learn every move in the game, so it was a very popular mon, and its inclusion really helped hype up the movie for the kid audience. It's a shallow thing to make a movie popular, but for the audience at the time, it was a clever move, and Mewtwo's inclusion was also a great touch, as he did appear a few times in the anime, and while he is a rather typical Grimtool edgelord from a 90s anime, he does have an amazing design and a cool voice.
I am the new ruler of this world, the master of humans and Pokémon alike.
And compared to a lot of the villains we normally get in Pokémon who are just jokes, it is cool to see a genuine serious threat for a change. The animation, while not always consistent, does look really lovely, at the times where it's clear where it was a better paid animation team that was working on it, but most of the time the animation is on par with what we got on the show at the time. But for the times when it goes big, it does look really amazing, almost Akira Toriyama levels. I also love the sense of atmosphere and aesthetic of Mewtwo's Island Castle kinda has an 80s dark fantasy animated movie vibe about it, like The Black Cauldron or The Last Unicorn, and it looks awesome, and it really does help give a sense of dread and suspense to an otherwise standard anime TV adaptation. And I give credit to the moments where it does try to go cinematic, it really does feel it. As one of my first cinematic experiences, it's one that really did stick with me because it felt unlike anything I'd seen at that point in my life. For a 7-year-old, it felt mature, it felt dark, and of course as an adult, it feels a bit trite and a little bit preachy. Yeah, let's get to the big problem with the movie. The message, or at least the attempt at one. Near the end, when the clone Pokemon and the regular Pokemon duke it out, it suddenly goes all, "Oh, think of the children," and "Oh, the humanity," or Pokality, I suppose, where they start going on about how awful it is that Pokemon are fighting each other.
Pokemon aren't meant to fight. Not like this.
Yes, Pokemon fighting each other is bad now. I suppose you could argue that this time it's not for friendly competition, they're just wailing on each other, and it does actually look pretty violent, but this is not really that different to what they do in every single aspect of this franchise. You can't turn face now, Nintendo, and start going, "Fighting is bad, why can't we all just get along?" when you created the world's biggest franchise that is all themed around violence. And that's fine, but don't start getting on your high horse about this and acting like you know better than us because you dedicate a whole movie to it. So yeah, that part really sucks, and the ending with how things all resolve is just bad, if arguably not worse, but I will say that the good parts of this movie are genuinely good. Is it perfect? Oh hell no. In fact, I'd argue it's not really anything that great. But for what it is, it can be fun and does have some great things about it. Hence why I still have fond memories of it, even to this day. But it's not the best in terms of anime movies, or hell, even in terms of the Pokemon movies. Though this movie does have one thing that those other movies don't have: Billie Piper. Yeah, she's on the soundtrack of this movie, and I'm not sure if that's awesome or just really weird, which kind of sums up this movie in a nutshell, really. But let's move on to something else that is both really awesome and really weird, with the first TV show of the week.